Psalm 23 is universally known as a poem for funerals. It's the first thing we reach for when the world goes dark. We print it on memorial cards and read it over caskets. We hear those gentle words, "The Lord is my shepherd," and our minds immediately go to a peaceful pastoral scene, a soft focus painting of Jesus in a white robe, cradling a lamb in a field of green grass. It feels like a lullaby for the end of life. Except that's not what it is at all. Every year, shepherds in ancient Israel faced a brutal choice: stay where the grass was dying, or risk walking their sheep through deep valleys where predators waited in the dark. When you understand that choice, you realize Psalm 23 isn't a poem for the dying, it's a battle cry for the living. The comfort it offers isn't a peaceful exit, it's the assurance of protection right in the middle of danger. The world of the ancient shepherd was violent and unforgiving, and the most famous line in this entire psalm, "The valley of the shadow of death," isn't just a metaphor, it's a real place on a map. To understand what David is actually saying, you have to look past the stained glass windows. You have to step out of the air-conditioned sanctuary and into the reality of the Judean wilderness. This isn't the rolling green of Ireland or the gentle hills of the English countryside. This is a land of rock, dust, and intense heat. Everything here is scorched, sharp, and dry. Shepherding in this terrain wasn't a job for boys in soft robes. It was the work of tough, solitary men who spent months alone surviving the elements. They were constantly moving, driving their flocks from one meager patch of brush to the next, hunting for hidden water sources. And danger was everywhere. Lions and bears actively roamed these hills in David's time. We know this because David later told King Saul about striping down a lion and a bear to rescue his sheep. Throw in wolves, hyenas, and thieves, and the shepherd was the flock's only line of defense. He had to be strong, hyper-vigilant, and willing to use force to protect what was his. The life of the flock followed a seasonal rhythm. In the summer, the shepherd led them up to high plateaus, the actual green pastures, where the altitude allowed for better grazing. But as winter approached, the highlands froze over. To survive, the flock had to move down to the warmer, lower plains. And to get there, there was usually only one option: through deep, narrow ravines that cut through the mountains. This is the world behind the words. When David writes about the valley of the shadow of death, he's describing a terrifyingly real geography. In Hebrew, the phrase is gay tzadamavet. A gay isn't a wide open valley. It's a gorge, a steep, narrow canyon with vertical walls. Tzalmavet is a compound word. Tzal means shadow, and mavet means death. It's the shadow of death, because the ravine is so deep and narrow that sunlight rarely reaches the bottom. It's a place of permanent gloom, where predators can hide a foot away from the path, and a sudden flash flood can sweep through and drown a flock in seconds. For a sheep, walking into a gay tzalmavet goes against every survival instinct. They are prey animals. They want wide open spaces where they can see danger coming. To force them into a dark canyon where they are blind and trapped is a nightmare. They would refuse. They would only take a single step into that darkness for one reason: because they trusted the shepherd leading them. But the journey is necessary. The shepherd knows they can't stay on the mountain forever, and the only way to the life-giving warmth of the winter plains is through the shadow. This is where the psalm shifts. "I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The sheep's courage doesn't come from self-confidence, and it doesn't come because the valley suddenly becomes safe. The courage is entirely about the presence of the shepherd and his gear.
Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. We've sanitized these tools over the years, picturing a quaint wooden walking stick. But the shepherd's gear was practical and rugged. The staff, the mishena, was the long pole with a crook on the end. It was for guidance and rescue. The shepherd used it to nudge a straying sheep, maintain direction, or hook a lamb out of a thicket. It represented his careful, moment-by-moment management. The rod, however, was a weapon. The Hebrew word is shevet. It was a short, heavy club made of dense oak, often embedded with iron knots or metal spikes. The shepherd wore it in his belt. The shevet wasn't for nudging sheep. It was for breaking bones and fighting off predators. When a predator lunged from the shadows, the shepherd didn't wave his staff, he drew his rod. So when David says, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me," he's making a profound point. The sheep is comforted because the shepherd is intimately involved in its path, and because the shepherd is armed and fully capable of destroying anything that threatens it. True comfort isn't passive. It's the security of knowing that the one leading you is both incredibly gentle and fiercely protective.
Then the scene shifts again. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. If we stick to our modern images, this makes zero sense. Who stops for a formal dinner in a canyon crawling with wolves? But in the ancient world, it's brilliant. A table, shulchan, wasn't a piece of furniture. It referred to a flat plateau or mesa. After navigating the terrifying ravine, a good shepherd would lead his flock onto one of these high, flat plateaus where the sheep could finally rest. But before letting them graze, the shepherd would walk the perimeter, driving out vipers from the rocks with his staff and checking the brush with his rod. The predators are still there. They're watching from the edges of the plateau, waiting in the shadows. But on this table, secured by the shepherd, the sheep can eat in peace. The meal doesn't deny the danger, it defies it. Next, David writes, "You anoint my head with oil." It sounds like a luxurious royal coronation, but for a shepherd, it was practical medicine. In the suffocating heat, swarms of insects tormented the flock. The worst was the nasal fly, which would try to lay eggs inside the wet tissue of the sheep's nose. If successful, the larvae would drive the animal so mad with pain that it would repeatedly bash its own head against rocks. To prevent this, a good shepherd would mix olive oil, sulfur, and spices and smear this thick, pungent grease all over the sheep's face. The oil acted as a natural barrier, repelling the flies. The anointing wasn't about making the sheep feel special. It was messy, intimate care designed to save its life from a hidden torment. And after that long, dusty trek, the shepherd finally brings them to a filled cistern. "My cup runs over." He doesn't ration the water. He fills the troughs until they spill onto the dirt. It's a picture of extravagant abundance after a season of absolute scarcity. So when we say, "The Lord is my shepherd," it's not a statement of passive submission. It's a declaration of allegiance to a rugged protector, provider, and king. It's a commitment to follow someone who knows the way forward, even when that way enters the dark. And that care doesn't stop when the journey ends. The psalm closes with a promise. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." The English translation is beautiful, but it misses the urgency of the Hebrew text. The word for follow is radaf. It doesn't mean to stroll meekly behind. It is an aggressive, relentless verb meaning to pursue, to hunt down, or to chase.
It's the exact word used to describe an army hunting its enemy on a battlefield. And what is hunting us? Not judgment and not vengeance, but tov and hesed, goodness and covenant loyalty.
David isn't picturing two gentle companions walking behind him. He's picturing two fierce guard dogs, two relentless hunters dispatched by the shepherd king, chasing him down and cornering him every single day. No matter what valley you run into, God's loyal love will hunt you down. This ancient imagery echoes straight into the New Testament. Centuries later, when Jesus stands up and says, "I am the good shepherd," the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. His audience didn't picture a stained glass window. They pictured this rugged protector. But Jesus takes the imagery a step further. He doesn't just lead his flock through the valley of the shadow of death, he enters it for them. The cross was the ultimate Gate Almavet, the place of absolute darkness. Jesus walked into it willingly, taking the full force of the strike so his sheep could pass through safely. This changes how we face our own valleys, whether it's a medical diagnosis, a broken relationship, deep grief, or heavy uncertainty. The darkness is real, and the anxiety is valid. But the promise of Psalm 23 isn't that you get to skip the valley. The promise is that you don't walk it alone. The shepherd is there with a staff to guide you and a rod to fight for you. He is preparing a table in the chaos, putting an oil barrier between you and the thoughts that threaten to drive you mad, and pouring out a grace that overflows. The comfort of this psalm isn't a soft pillow. It's a suit of armor. Your story doesn't end just because you're currently in the dark. The final line of the psalm is a definitive destination, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The valleys aren't aimless. They are leading somewhere, to a home where the shepherd is the host, and the shadows are gone for good. You aren't lost. You're just on the way home. If you're walking through a valley right now, leave a comment below and share what part of this psalm speaks into your situation. Let's make the comments a space where we can support one another. And if you want to keep uncovering the real-world history behind these ancient texts, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Share this with someone who needs to know they aren't walking through the dark alone.